Good evening and welcome. We'd like to call to order the joint meeting of the Common Council Finance and Claims Committee, along with the Board of Education Finance Committee for today, Thursday, January 11, 2024, beginning at 6:07 p.m. Before we proceed with the agenda, we'd like to call the roll of the two finance committees. For the Finance and Claims Committee of the Common Council, we have with us Councilmember Heather Dunn, Councilmember James Freya, Councilmember Johan Lopez,
Present.
Councilmember Melissa Murray, and Councilmember Doug Sutton.
Present.
And myself, Greg Burnett, and I'll turn it to Chairperson of the Board of Ed Finance Committee for their roll call.
Good evening, everyone. For the Board of Education Finance Committee, tonight we have Chairperson, Board of Education, Diana Carpio, and myself, Sherry McCready.
We also have in the audience members of the Common Council, Councilmember Jalen Seed, and also Councilmember Barbara Smith.
I also want to make sure that folks know that I have some Board of Education members here as well. I've got Board Member Ashley Gullias and also Board Member Jimmy Randolph. And Samantha Pleasant is here as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll start before we move to public participation with a few opening comments from Mayor Harry Milling and our Superintendent, Dr. Alex Estrella.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. Good evening, Dr. Estrella. Good evening, members of the Common Council Finance Committee. Good evening, members of the Board of Education Finance Committee. Good evening to all those out in the audience, as well as those listening virtually. You know, each year we go through this process, and as elected officials, this is probably one of the most difficult functions that we have. We have to put together a budget that is fair and equitable, a budget that provides the services that the citizens of Norwalk are entitled to receive with their taxes, and a budget that will fund the Board of Education and Norwalk Public Schools in a manner in which we want to make sure that our young people are given the finest education anywhere. And it's a challenge. I've often said that the way we have to finance our budget through property taxes is not the most favorable way. Financing through property taxes, that system is, I call it a regressive system, because whether or not you have a job, your taxes are due. Whether your company is making a profit, your taxes are due. So it's income and profit blind. And that's unfortunate, but we in Connecticut, we're one of 4 states that rely so heavily on property taxes, so we don't have much of a choice. This year is going to be a particularly challenging year because, as we know, inflation is at a many years high, about 7.5%. It may be coming down a little bit. And the everything that we purchase is costing more. We know that the Norwalk Public Schools are experiencing the inflation. The city of Norwalk's experiencing inflation. But just as probably more importantly, the citizens of Norwalk are experiencing that same level of inflation. So it's going to be a challenge for us to put together a budget, as I mentioned earlier, that is fair and equitable to all concerned. I think we all understand the importance of education for our children. We're investing in our future, so we have to do everything we can to work with the Board of Education, Norwalk Public Schools, to make sure that we have a cohesive process, working together and making concessions where we can and understanding things that are absolutely necessary. A couple of years ago, we started talking about wants versus needs. This probably is more important than ever. It's always nice to talk about the things that you would like to have, but it's more important to talk about the things that you absolutely need to have. So we try to function on a needs versus wants kind of process. And I think over the years, from my experience working with the city for 51 years now, I find that this is probably one of the most cohesive projects we have when we work with the Board of Education in the city of Norwalk. In the past, it's been very contentious. We've tried to limit that. We've tried to work closely together. I had lunch with Dr. Estrella today, and we agreed that we need to work together and try to make sure that we get this done in a manner that is professional, in a manner that accomplishes all the things we need to accomplish. So I thank everybody for being here. We want to hear from the public what your thoughts are so that we can make our informed decisions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Rowland.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, the board, and the public. Thank you for joining us here today in what is our second conversation with the Finance Committee regarding the budget for the fiscal year 24-25. As the mayor articulated, the budget process is not an easy process because it forces us to, one, think about what are the key priorities that we want to continue to emphasize for us, in particular, in the Board of Education, to continue to improve our school system. A community is best served when our schools are well equipped and our students are educated so that they can be the leaders of tomorrow, and in many cases of today. As we thought through the budget process, we took into account our strategic plan and our priorities, and we led through that process to ensure that our key areas of focus were aligned to the goals and priorities that we had set in collaboration with the board. As we think through the budget process, some of the key things that we were looking at, one is how to effectively support all of our students. One, in ensuring that we continue to provide the programming diversity that's necessary to educate a really diverse population of learners. Two, we also needed to take into account the growing diversity within our district, particularly our growing MLL population and students with specialized needs, and making sure that we have the programs and resources necessary to really equip them as well as other students with the tools that they need. Thinking about specialized programs like IB, Gifted and Talented, and other programs that we have throughout the district that allow us for pathway and program diversity, and thinking about how to continue to resource those programs that are essential to the success of all of our students, particularly in preparing them for the future ahead. As we thought about the budget, we also wanted to keep in mind the importance of supporting our teachers and making sure that they have adequate planning time so that they could be successful in the classroom, and providing students with the resources that they need because they are well prepared and equipped to do so. So part of our budget conversation will entail providing additional release time for educators, particularly at the elementary school level. Obviously, these conversations are not easy and will require a lot of dialogue and conversation, answering questions to build clarity. But like the mayor articulated, our goal is to do this in a productive and ample way. One, to well inform the public about the work that's happening within our school system, which I think our educators, school leaders, and other personnel have done an incredible job thus far. And we want them to continue to have the tools necessary to do that. So I'm hoping that today will provide the coming Council Finance Committee some insight in our thinking behind the budget process, and we look forward to answering questions and continuing the dialogue. I think dialogue is critical for us to, one, inform the public of the work that we're trying to do collectively, and most importantly, that we keep up top of mind why we do this work. We do this work for the children of Norwalk. We do this work for Norwalk because the future of Norwalk depends on how well we educate and support the students within our system. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, and thank you for having us here today.
Right, thank you, Dr. Strayer. The joint meeting tonight is one of several opportunities to share information and continue the dialogue so both committees can better understand the operating budget goals, objectives, and challenges for the upcoming 2024-2025 fiscal year in the overall budget cycle. It is essential that we understand the priorities that we're facing going forward, so that we can move towards creating one City of Norwalk operating budget. The Board of Education has tentatively approved their budget request, and we will hear more about that this evening, as it relates to the operating budget request. So we're only focusing on the operating budget, not the capital budget tonight. We will first hear from our city budget director, Tom Ellis, who will cover the city operating budget guidelines and challenges that we forecast in the upcoming cycle. And then we'll hear from the Chief Financial Officer of Norwalk Public Schools, Mr. Luna Usmani, who will cover the operating budget priorities for the Board of Education. And I'll turn it over to Sherry for any opening comments.
Thank you, Councilmember. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending the joint Board of Education and Common Council Finance Committee meeting. The goal of this meeting is to share thoughts, ideas, and concerns relative to the FY25 budget. But before we move on, I will share this with you, and I think I mentioned this at our last meeting, and that is that Norwalk Public Schools is the most successful city school system in Connecticut. The district has made much progress. However, there is a lot more to be done, and we are proud of the work that has been done. Some of the key drivers for FY25 include funding for teacher release time. One of the things that we have heard from the teachers is the need for additional prep time, particularly at the elementary school level. Other key drivers include contractual obligations and student enrollment relative to multilingual learners, or MLL, and special education learners. One of the many things that we're seeing is an increase of students needing specialized services, currently over 15%. At the same time, unfunded state mandates, along with the rising costs of services for out-of-district providers, we are seeing an increased stress on our budget. For instance, relative to unfunded mandates, there is a financial impact of the law extending instruction to students who receive specialized services through the end of the school year that they turn 22 years of age. Moreover, as you all know, NPS is legally required to provide these special ed services to fulfill the needs of a student's individual education plan, whether that student is in the district or by an outside provider. Every student is entitled to receive an excellent education that will ensure a successful future. The final two drivers are the reinstatement of the magnet school funding and the school lunch fund contribution. In conclusion, on behalf of the board, we look forward to continued discussions and collaboration with the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. We will now move to item 3 on the agenda, which is public participation. We really would like to hear any thoughts that the members of the public might have as it relates to the upcoming budget cycle. If there's anyone physically in the room here in the council chambers that wishes to speak, there's a sign-up sheet up front. And look to our IT support. Do we have anyone who has raised their hand electronically who wishes to speak at this time?
So if anybody would like to speak online, please raise your hand.
Okay. Let's announce it one more time and then we'll move on.
Okay. Anybody online that would like to speak, please raise your hand.
Okay, hearing and seeing none, we'll proceed, close public participation at this time and move forward with the presentation, starting with Mr. Budget Director Tom Ellis.
Evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm talking about the city side operating budget process, sort of a macro level view of how we went about putting in all of our requests and the guidelines that we passed out to all our departments and divisions. Sorry, I jumped the gun. And you can go ahead. What's that? Oh, I can do it? Which one? Top? Oh, I see, I got it. There we go. Okay, so general overall look at the economy. For those of you who saw a similar presentation around this time last year, it is generally a bit rosier than it was last year. Inflation has reduced while recession fears have diminished. Inflation was 6.5% last year, less than half of that this year, according to the latest statistics in December, so it has come down significantly, although I'm sure it doesn't feel like it based on the bills that we're seeing. And then in terms of the recession, you'll recall a lot of doom and gloom around this time last year about what was going to happen in terms of that. But most of those fears seem to have subsided, and the Fed talks a lot about a soft landing or no landing. So hopefully those things are past its worst part. Interest rates, although remain very, very high. The Fed is 5.25 to 5.5, but the key thing for most of the residents and businesses are the auto loans and mortgages, which remain 7+, at least on the 30-year fixed, which is very, very high compared to what most people are used to for the last decade or so. Credit cards, 20% plus these days. So those are big compelling factors for individuals and businesses. The housing market remains slow with the increase in borrowing rates, but also in particular, there's very little inventory in certain regions of the country, including the tri-state area here. We see it in Norwalk, right? I think I talked to a local realtor over the weekend, and they said there were 23 houses for sale in Norwalk, which seems incredibly low. So we've all seen it, right? House goes on the market, 35 people show up at the open house, 10 bids over offer, all in cash, no inspection, some very crazy things going on. But that takes somebody who's willing, well, if they don't have the cash, to jump into a 7% mortgage, and not a whole lot of people have the wherewithal to do that. Stock market had an unexpectedly strong 2023, 13% year over year. I think that surprised a lot of people given all the doom and gloom that we were seeing coming out of COVID. And also the increasing US interest rates and strengthening US dollar are putting pressure on foreign countries. We see some geopolitical unrest still going on overseas. So at any given moment, those types of things could have a significant impact on the world economy. Layoffs continue, particularly in the tech sector and big banking, Amazon, Salesforce, LinkedIn, Spotify, Facebook, all the big names that we know and love. Tend to hire a little bit too quickly and then have to take some stringent measures as things tighten up. So, and obviously, again, here in the tri-state area, and so close to New York City, a lot of local impact from when those types of companies start cutting back. More locally, Connecticut firms continue to announce layoffs, although it has diminished a bit over the last year. CVS Health in Hartford, 521 people locally. The large Walmart store closed, although it sounds like Target is coming in and could replace some of those jobs. Some major nursing home in the state, Waterbury Gardens. I don't know why I keep looking up at that one, I can't read it from here. And now it's time to scroll on. Which one am I hitting, this one?
Yeah, in 20.
Point it. Right here.
Oh, here, I'll.
Basically just hit the right.
Yeah. Oh, you guys, yes. There we go. So that's the national firm layoffs I just talked about. And finally, the local layoffs that I also referred to. So a couple of Norwalk-based and Norwalk impact ones as well. And there it is. And then last comment, WFSB poll, what are people concerned about in Connecticut? Inflation, cost of living, and taxes, that's pretty consistent year over year, so. Next page. There we go. How does this all relate to the impact on Norwalk budgeting? So we got tight controls on spending increases. Each department, we send out notification at the beginning of this process to try to contain their asks between 2.5% and 3% for fiscal '25. One of the key things to keep in mind, the city has, I believe, 6 or 7 unions, and all of them are up for contract negotiations because the contracts expire on June 30th of this year. So for the past 3 to 4 years, we've been budgeting 2.35% for the raises that were agreed upon. So those negotiations are ongoing. We don't know what that number is going to be going forward. It could be as high as 3 to 4.5%. Obviously, we've all seen the headlines with what the airlines have got, auto workers, but the municipal sector obviously is a different burden. So that's one component. What we don't know is how it's going to affect us just yet. Some fixed cost budget items, which we expect to have higher increases, generally in the 5 to 20% range. Health insurance is going to be around 9%. Pension and OPEB, it's probably about 10 to 12%. And then debt service, that's what we have to pay for all the bonds that we've taken out over the last few years. And that's probably going to be in the 10 to 12% range. So if you lock in those items where we have no flexibility, it forces us to take the 3% down for all the other departments where there is some control on the variable expenses. How are we going to help with this? We're going to intend to offset these increases, get as many grants as we can, and if necessary, explore the option of drawing down the rainy day fund. We don't generally like to do that. We haven't had to do that in years, but it's always an option if it comes to it. One other thing to note is the city is going, well, as most of you know, the city is going through a full revaluation, and that's going to have an impact on taxes. There's also going to be a shift from the commercial side of the assessment to the residential side. So in other words, commercial values have gone up just a little bit, but the average increase on the residential side is 35%. Careful to note, that does not mean a 35% increase in your taxes. You can't take that multiplier and go right past the old mill rate. We still have a ways to go. The mill rate will be modified. So they may go up, definitely go up, but not by 35%. Okay. And what are we concerned about? So, given all my talk there, okay, given my talk on the economy and such, and high interest rates on the taxpayers, individuals may be asked to cut back on their hours of work, maybe more layoffs, companies going out of business. And again, one of the other concerns, as I was just mentioning, was the impact of labor negotiations that are ongoing. Connecticut is still not back to where they were back in 2008 before the debt crisis, and also the migration of taxpayers from Connecticut to low-tax states. And that's not unique to Connecticut. That's a nationwide phenomenon, going to North Carolina, Florida, Texas, some of the other places where taxes are much lower for different reasons. The other thing to consider is the gravy train of federal funds is over. All the ARPA money that we received over the last few years, to the tune of about $39.5 million on the city side, which allowed us to take advantage of some significant projects and help out with other things while we were struggling with some of our budget issues, but that is over. So no longer an option to pursue those funds. What do we propose to do? We're going to continue to provide essential municipal service at the lowest cost and minimize tax increases as best we can. Manage the less controllable costs of debt service and employee benefits. So how do we do that? We're going through a capital process, similar process on the capital side as we speak. So we're taking a very sharp look at all the requests for the capital projects. So the lower we can keep the capital projects down, That means we have to bond less over the summer, which means it doesn't add as much to the debt service. So debt service is one of those unmanageable costs once you commit. So we'll do our best to minimize that going forward for the coming years. And on employee benefits, shop around, get the best value you can. Work on your workman's compensation. How do you minimize falls? How do you minimize claims? That type of thing. But that's ongoing to a certain degree, but we definitely have to step up efforts in those areas. And then identify opportunities to reduce spending and prioritize additional increases. As the mayor was saying, wants versus needs has sort of become our mantra over the last few years, and we will continue to pound that drum. And finally, offset the total increases, again, as I said before, utilizing state grants, federal grants wherever possible. And a lot of the departments out there are very aggressive in applying for a lot of different grants. Alan Lowe leading the charge on the air conditioning program through the state of Connecticut. So we're hopeful that will help some things. But that is pretty much the story on the city side. So we're away in the budget process right now. Just today, we finalized all of our requests, so the Board of Ed is maybe a month to 6 weeks ahead of us in the process. So we do not have a recommended yet, but that's next on the list. And we will do a similar presentation with all of the recommendations, final percentages, and the anticipated impact on mill rates and taxes. I believe we have to release that information on February 12th and present it then. So that's where we stand at present. Any questions?
Any questions?
I don't have a question, but just as the city is talking about all these different increases and layoffs and contractual obligations and negotiations, North Public Schools has the same, experiences and responsibilities. And yes, this whole wants versus needs has been going around in circles and it keeps coming up. But we're talking about educating children. We're not talking about, want of going away on a vacation. So wants versus needs in reality for us is no education to a quality education. And I hope that everybody keeps that in mind and we continue having these open conversations because we're both in the same boat. The only difference is we have a lot of obligation, a lot of responsibility. It's like Dr. Estrella said, the children are our future. And the children is also, a good public school system helps with realty, house prices. People want to move here. And the reason we are number one is because of all the changes, because of the vision, because of all the hard work and the dedication and staffing. And that's the other thing, we have to think of the staff. So I'm looking forward to having more detailed conversations, but I think the dialogue of wants versus needs has to change.
Anything else?
One question that I did have, Tom, you mentioned the negotiations that are taking place with the contracts. What is the timing on all of that, and how does that have an impact on the current budget work that is taking place?
Well, as far as I know, they're just beginning now. The contract ends on June 30th, and we will do our darndest to have them completed and something in place by then, but that doesn't always happen, in which case business as usual until a new contract is signed, and then whatever pay increases and changes they get become retroactive. What we did this year is we budgeted 2.35% again, and we had set aside a contingency amount based on, in anticipation of something more than 2.35% in case it ends up going that way. If not, then that will make it easier for the budget process, but we won't know that for quite some time.
Kind of as a new person here, just some background education. I was so impressed with the grants that Alan Lowe did, but they are, as in my former life, I've written grants, they're very, very time consuming. Just for both, do we have enough staff for attacking that more and have, it's must be a lot of work. how do we support that?
It is, well, I'll tell you the way we're structured, we have a part-time grants coordinator that sits within the finance department who assists all the departments in, finding out, she does a good job in finding grants. She spends a lot of time searching, talking to people, going to, networking events to try to find out what's out there. But the departments that consistently ask for it and get a lot of grants have some pretty talented people in there who know what they're doing, including Alan Lowe. Vanessa has some very, very strong people in the public works area that do the same. Jessica has, the economic and community development. Jim Travers in particular has a tremendous amount of grants. He's been very, very successful in that. So I think, we've talked sometimes about getting a full-time grant writer, but I think that would be too much for them to bite off, so to speak. So we allow the individual departments with their subject matter experts to go after and pursue. The part-timer finds even more opportunities or opportunities for areas that wouldn't normally get them. And so that's the way we're structured right now. It seems to be working pretty well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tom, I heard you mention the fact that the fund balance was available, that in need, if we really needed it, we could take it, take some of it. I'd really be interested to find out what is the criteria that you would look at in order to monitor how much of that fund balance you could take. I'm very, very anxious about taking any of it. That's why it's called a rainy day fund for a specific reason.
Yeah, well, the good news, Jim, is we just finished our audit for 2023, and our rainy day fund went from about 77.5 million to about 78.5 million. So it continues to trend in the right direction. We haven't touched it. I think, to your point, we would not make a move without significant consultation with our bond advisor, who is very tightly wired to all the bond rating agencies and is familiar with our statistics, our bond debt to expense ratio and other thresholds that are out there that the bond rating agencies look at to determine whether or not we keep our AAA, they put us on watch, or they take us down, which would be very, very unlikely at this point, given our history of maintaining a AAA. So I think at some point in the process, if it becomes untenable to move forward without a drawdown, then the discussions with the bond advisor to say, hey, if we do this, what do you think? And he has a strong network in the bond industry and the rating industry where he could give us a good view on, maybe you could take it down 5, maybe you could take it down 8, but 10, no, that type of thing. So we wouldn't make that kind of move without significant guidance from the experts.
Yeah, one more comment I'd like to make. During the recent election, I had the great opportunity to go around and knock on people's doors and beg for their votes. But one of the things that I did say, rather than asking people for what their problems were, was asking them what they liked about the city and what they thought was good about the city. And I was and immediately a smile came across their face. They were talking about the diversity of NOLA. They talked about the beaches. They talked about the infrastructure of the city. They talked about the fact that the roads are paved and painted and so forth. They did also talk about the Board of Education, saying that they thought it was a great Board of Education. Schools were good. They were very satisfied with it. I think what we have to keep in mind is that we have to maintain that level. It's one of the reasons why we're one of the most sought after cities to live in the country. So we have to, we are really challenged in looking at this budget to maintain all of those services, whether it's the Board of Education, whether it's the traffic mobility and parking, whether it's the DEP, whatever it is, we have to maintain, we have to provide that level of service to our citizens to keep them here. On the other hand, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that this is their money we're using. So I just like to say that, and it's right across the board. It's not just Board of Education, it's not just the operations of the city, it's together, everything. It's got to be taken as a whole.
I appreciate you finishing on an upbeat note there with all the good things that you heard.
I was just gonna say, and we're answering Mr. Freyr's question, and being on the BET, we have probably drawn down each year on the rainy day fund or added funds from the rainy day fund into our operating budget. But through strong fiscal management, responsible management on our department head, we've not had to really take the money that we put aside. So we'll probably do the same thing this year because the goal is to give tax relief where we can. And so we'll probably do the same this year, but encouraging the department heads to live within their means, and they really do a good job of that.
Anything else?
Are there any grants that the city is going after? I know you mentioned earlier about grants and you talked about the air conditioning grant that Alan's working on. Are there any other grants that you're pursuing?
I'm not real close to that process, but I know it's an ongoing process, a daily process, if you will.
We're always applying for grants. In fact, today I just sent 2 emails I got relative to available grants, sent it to our grant writer or grant coordinator, as well as sending them to the department heads that may be affected. So we're constantly looking for grants.
Good. One more.
Hi. I have a question about the ARPA funds. Can you tell me what percentage of the overall budget that added to our budget?
Well, it didn't really add to our budget, and the reason I say that is because those funds didn't go into the general fund, which is what we're talking about when we talk about our operating budgets right now. It was a separate fund. Think of it, you open a new account just for one specific reason, that type of thing. So we got 20 million one year, 19 the next. But what that did was it took a little pressure off of the capital side of the house, as well as, some things within the operating budget, not everything. But imagine a capital project, $10 million to do XYZ project, and ARPA comes along, and it turns out that it is ARPA eligible, because there were very strict guidelines about what you could use the ARPA money for. Well, you could take that off the capital list and use ARPA funds for it. So it gave us some relief on the capital side when we were doing our planning. And departments who sort of had a wish list and some holy grail items were able to take advantage of that money and take care of a few of those things. So, and at the same time, there were some operating budget efficiencies that were gained, but what happened when the government gave out that money, they cautioned people, use these for non-recurring expenses. Don't use them for something that you're going to get used to, because when the money runs out, then suddenly you have a problem. You committed to $1 million a year using these funds, and then when it is over, what are you gonna do? You're gonna cut the program now that people are used to it? No, you're gonna have to find a way to fund it. So I think in general, we did a very, very good job in terms of managing that, although it's not over. The guideline on that is, I believe the end of December of this year, the money has to be committed, obligated, signed contract, purchase order, such and such. And then the actual checks have to be cut by December 31st of 26. So I believe there was a headline in the local media a couple weeks ago where it said Norwalk has only spent half its money. That may be true in terms of the commitment, but from our tracking and what we've committed to, not officially, we haven't signed, but we've allocated funds out, it's all gone.
So otherwise it's flat.
Say again?
So otherwise it's gonna be flat with the percent, it's not including the percent of the.
Correct, yeah, no, it's not, it's not included in the year-over-year percentages. It wasn't previously when we first started receiving the funds, and it isn't now. I didn't mean to imply that that was the last question I would take if there are others.
Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you, Tom.
All right, thank you.
We'll proceed forward with Mr. Osmani for the presentation on the events of the road.
Good evening, members of the Joint Finance Committee. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you today. Again, we thank you for the time and effort you put into this process. We realize it's not easy. So I'm going to briefly go over our budget process from the BOE side. We begin with a strategic plan. Everything that we do, we are 3 years, now year 3 into a 5-year strategic plan, and this is the document, the guideline that we use to develop our priorities. And the 5 priorities are future readiness, ensuring that all of our students are ready for the future. Equity, ensuring that all students have equal access regardless of language status, learning status, that we provide equal access. So as we put this budget together, we take that into account as well. We talk about excellence in everything we do, excellence in teaching, excellence in provision of services, excellence in food services, in everything that we do. The strategic plan also believes strongly in engagement, engaging our parents, our community members in decision-making, not just related to the funding of our programs, but also to the content of our programs as well. When we do school construction, we do extensive engagement. So we do believe in engagement, and then obviously, high-quality instruction and support for our individuals. So what we've done this year for a second year in a row now is we have handed out to you our budget book for the fiscal year 24-25, and we did this last year as well. Within that book, I'm not going to go into every single detail, but within that book, you have the superintendent's message that's included in the book. There is a budget overview and highlights within that budget book. Within the book, we also talk about the factors that are influencing the budget, what are the drivers. Within this budget book, we also include our budget assumptions. What are the assumptions we're making in developing this? One of the things that we heard also before was detail is important. And so this budget book contains 5-year history of line items for the general fund, the grant fund, and the lunch fund. There's over almost 50, 60 lines. It's the lowest level of detail we can provide from the system, but that is included in the budget book. We have a series of schedules that show that for those 3 funds. We also include, because we are in the business of educating our children, we do share also the successes, academic success of our students. So that's also included in the budget book. Obviously, we're driven by enrollment, and so we also have enrollment projections. We look back and looking forward, so we have those enrollment projections. We actually have those projections detailed by school. In the book, we have done 2 years worth of projections, but we can also provide a report each year. We do a 10-year projection of enrollment. It's done by a demographer who does this for schools. He looks at birth rates, immigration patterns, and all of those things in determining that. And he's been really spot on in terms of enrollments. And then obviously, we are a people business. We have included in this budget book a summary of staffing changes by job class and by location. So you could look at, pick any location, Norwalk High School, central office, finance department, you will see employment information. I believe we've included 3 years worth of history on the summary, and then at the granular detail level, that is also included in that book. So we want to make sure that we provide as much information as we can. So as far as the general fund, which is the primary operating fund of the city, this year, as you saw last meeting in December, the Board of Ed approved a tentative budget that is an 8.2% increase over the prior year. And yes, it is a big number for anyone to absorb, but again, as I go into this detail, we'll talk about what's driving. When we presented that number at the Board of Education, we were asked, how do we compare with other districts within our area? So this is most recent data we have. Danbury is actually presenting tonight or last night. They're looking at 19.2%. And I think one thing to point out is with last year, we went through the challenges of how do we move forward as the ESSER grants have expired. We were ahead. Most of our neighboring districts are dealing with that this year. And that's kind of where Danbury is. Their percentage is similar to where we started last year, but that's where they are in the process. So you have Darien, New Canaan, obviously Norwalk, they're sorted in alphabetical order, and so forth. But that's just kind of a reference of where do we fit in relation to others around us. When you talk to, we talk as CFOs, we're all experiencing similar challenges. It's special education, it's multilingual learners, it's the cost of doing business, inflation, utilities. we were fortunate that we were locked in to a utility contract for 5 years. That contract has since expired. They couldn't wait for it to expire to give us new rates because we have locked in at a much lower rate. So we're seeing almost 35 to 40% in utilities, and I believe it's the same on the city side. With the new constructions, we have new facilities that have air, and therefore we are spending more on things like air conditioning within our buildings because now we have buildings that have air conditioning. And so our utilities are going up, one, because of the rates is increasing, but also because we have buildings that are consuming more. In terms of our students and our demographic makeup, I think it's important to discuss as well, because this is also part of why people love Norwalk, as Councilmember Freire mentioned. We are loved because of our diversity. Our diversity is also reflected in our student population. And so our MLOs, multilingual learners, are within the district now just above 20%, but we also have students that require specialized services that is also increasing. We also have students that are on free and reduced lunches, and we are above, we're above average for most cities within the state. So that is a factor that we'll talk about. This chart here talks about our multilingual learners as a percentage, sorry. Out of order. Okay, thank you. This slide talks about our multilingual learners as a percentage of our population. So as you look at this, the bars represent the actual numbers of students. So this year, we have just over almost 2,500 students that are classified as multilingual learners. The blue bar shows how we are as a percentage of our total population. So you'll see that right now, we're just about 20%, a little over 20%, as a population of our students are multilingual learners. The green bar that you see that's kind of midway in the chart, that's where the state level of MLL as a percent of the population. So you see that when you look at Norwalk compared to the average of the state, our school district has a higher percentage of multilingual learners within our community. And that has an impact on the budget as well. And so that's why it's important not only to look at just the enrollment, but the composition of the enrollment as well. What was also mentioned earlier, I believe during the superintendent's comments, were students that required specialized services and specialized needs within our students. And therefore, you can see this chart, the bars are the student population. You can see that has been increasing over time. The blue bar, again, that represents Norwalk, is the percentage of our students that require specialized education needs. So you can see that again, as a percentage of the total population, that has also been increasing during this period of time. The green bar on this is looking at it, comparing it to the state level. So you see that at the state level, we're also seeing an increase in what we call the prevalence rate, the number of students that require specialized learning, but we're actually trending below the state in this one. So this is the opposite of the other chart that I shared with you before. In terms of overall population of our students, we're actually relatively flat. We are not seeing a significant increase in the number of students within our district. What we are seeing an increase is the mix of students over time based on the charts that I just showed. And so I think one way to look at how we fund education, you cannot look at the enrollment numbers in isolation without understanding the needs of your students within your district. And that's kind of where we are within Norwalk and others around the state as well. So I'm going to go into the budget. Similar to the city, we also have a number of grants that we receive from the state, from the federal government. We were also fortunate to receive some of the federal grants related to the pandemic. What is different, we refer to them as ESSER dollars, that's what they were called. What's different with the pandemic dollars that came to school districts compared to dollars that went to cities and towns. For cities and towns, I believe there were 5 categories of uses for those funds. you could use them for economic development, you could use them for infrastructure, roads and bridges. The requirement on towns and cities were all one-time things. You build a bridge, you're done, you don't build a bridge for another year. Those are the qualifications. For school districts, the requirements that we had to meet were different. We were required to use those funds to enhance learning. We were required to use those funds to provide intervention. We were required to use those funds to provide social-emotional support. And so these are things that you provide with people. And so that's why not just Norwalk, but many school districts use those ESSER funds to hire teachers and educators and paraeducators to help with the students, because that was what the essence of the ESSER dollars were to school districts. And this is not unique to Norwalk, it's across the country. What happens when those funds dry out, and this was a conversation we had last year, is the need did not dry up, the need remained. And therefore Norwalk and other school districts had to make a decision in how do we continue to provide these services that are still needed when funds have expired. And so the dilemma that schools had versus cities was different. We both had to make some tough decisions, but on the city side, on the schools district side, the conversations were different. Because we did have one-time uses, we put filters in buildings and we upgraded our facilities as well using those dollars. But there were many things that we were required to spend money on, mandated to spend money on, that were recurring just by the nature of the grants themselves. So on the grant side, we did see a reduction. I'm sorry this chart is not very legible, but hopefully you can see it on your sheets. We did see a dip in grants because we received almost 42 million in ESSER dollars during the pandemic, and those funds went away. So now we're more at the traditional funding level, which is money coming from the state to fund public education. This is a similar chart. It just breaks down those same grant dollars by the major grants. You'll see that in this chart, the first four are funds related to the pandemic. You'll see that the blue bar reflects the current year, and the bar next to it is fiscal year 25. Those are all zeros because those funds have gone away. We've depleted those. And so similar to what you have on the city side. The school lunch fund, and I'm going to invite Ms. Fayos to come speak to it, is the fund that we use to provide services to our children. During the pandemic, we also received funds that we could, for provision of school lunches to our students, and I'll let Ms. Fayos speak more on that and the plans.
Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk to you about our school lunch fund. My name is Sandra Fayos, and the food services actually falls under my purview, which is why Dr. Ludas Mani asked me to speak, and Dr. Estrella thought it would be a great way for us to provide you more insights. I just want to start off by saying that according to the National Bureau of Economic Research and other research, school lunch is something that is critical to the health of our students. So I think that we know that a brain and a body can only function efficiently if it actually has the nutrition that it needs to be able to learn properly. And actually, lack of food has been connected, or poor eating has been connected to depression and attention. And in many cases, in the areas that are poverty stricken, those students actually perform worse. And so there's a lot of research out there that can actually support that. Luckily for us, we're in a little bit of a different situation here in Norwalk, which is part of what makes us so unique, but everything comes at a cost. I want to point out that our school lunch fund, I'll take you back to when I was even a principal here, started off with us having students that some students paid, some students didn't pay. It was a typical system. In that system where some students qualified for free reduced lunch and other students paid for lunch, we always had a deficit. The reason why it's because we outsource that service. There's a fee that we pay for the meals that we have, and then we end up with a bill. A family would have a bill. They couldn't make good on that bill, so then the district absorbed the cost. A long time ago, we used to actually do something that was a little, I would say, archaic, which we would start to deny students food, and we would give them a cheese sandwich instead. So you would go up in the line as a student, you would go get a lunch, the lunch person would realize that your family had a balance that was an outstanding balance. You would have to put back the lunch that you just got, and instead you would give given a cheese sandwich. That practice here in district actually was ended prior to this administration, and with that practice ended, we actually saw a double in the deficits of our school lunch fund. And so the district, up until right before COVID, we used to have a deficit of almost $1 million. It was actually $930,000. So given that, the pandemic hit, and then we ended up having COVID funds or ESSER funds and universal meals for all. That means everybody got to eat for free. You got breakfast for free, you had lunch for free while you were in school, and we actually gave people meals during the weekends, and meals became something that we had for free. We actually accumulated quite a bit of a reserve during our COVID years because we still were getting reimbursement for meals, but we weren't paying for meals. So we were stacking those reserves. We knew that there would be a day when those funds would be depleted, so we were using those reserves to one day end up paying again for that deficit that we knew we had been historically accumulating and that we were going to be faced with once those ESSER funds depleted. When those funds depleted, we actually qualified for a grant, and I actually lead the grants department, so I can attest to how long grants take. But we qualified for a grant called CEP, the Community Eligibility Provision, and it allowed us to actually feed the whole district under this qualification. Some of it would be grant funded, and then some of it we would have to pay for a portion. In that, I brought before the board, is this something that we want to move forward with? And the reason being is because the portion that we would pay, being under this provision with everybody eating for free, was almost equivalent to the deficit that we were having to pick up without us having students, everybody having access to free meals. So the board moved forward with me submitting that application for the community eligibility provision. And since then, we're now in year 2 of it. We've been able to sustain it with the reserves that we had. And now this year, we actually are putting it into the operating budget to pick up the rest of the deficit. And now we have a request for next year, which is the request that we have made, which is the $1.2 million that we will have to be able to actually support that, that program. In the slides that I had before, it's a comparison of what it would have been like without the school lunch fund, and then the other one is what it's like with the community eligibility provision. What I would like to point out is if you compare the number of meals that we serve in pre-COVID in comparison to the number of meals that we have now, we actually have served over 500,000 more meals. Now, I want to point out that these are meals for all our students. It doesn't have to do with income level, but we did see an increase in students taking meals. We're actually trending this year, year to date, 4% higher than we trended last year. So families are actually having students eat breakfast at school and eat lunch at school at no cost to the families, but the district is asking for the funding to be able to maintain that program. Either way, we're going to either pay for a deficit or pay for everybody to be able to take advantage of this program.
Ms. Ferris explains that much better than I would. So going back to the general fund now, again, the general fund is our major operating fund within the district, and this is the fund that is funded through tax dollars and through the city of Norwalk. So as a percentage of our total budget, almost 85% of our budget is salaries and benefits. And this graph I call it the salaries and benefits eating up everything else, Pac-Man chart. But that's where all our money goes. Where are these people within the organization? Like, where do these individuals work? So you'll see that this chart shows, I broke it down between tax-funded positions and grant-funded positions. In fiscal year '25, we have just over 1,700 full-time equivalent positions. This chart shows where those positions live. And you'll see that between elementary, high school, and middle school, that is the bulk of our employees. We have employees that support children that don't work in schools, work in central office, things like facilities and transportation and instructional support. If you add those two bars together with the school bars, you see that 97% of our students, of our employees, serve kids directly in schools. And our support staff that's non-school based, non-instructional based, makes up about 3% or so of the overall distribution of population. Looking at that same chart, positions that are grant funded, we have about 190 full-time equivalent positions that are grant funded. And again, 96 to 97% of those positions are living in schools. With grants are unique because grants actually tell you what you can and what you can't do with these positions. And when we apply for these positions, we know specifically that these grants are to support our students. Recently, you heard that we were recipients of the $15 million Magnet School Assistance Program over a 5-year period, which is amazing to have received that. But that program is very specific. It tells you that you can only spend this money on magnet school programs. And so we're hiring staff at the school level to assist in that program. But that's kind of how the nature of programs and grant programs work. I'm sorry that this chart is also difficult to see, but what we wanted to do here is to show you what are the budget drivers, how do we get to that 8.2%. And the superintendent mentioned briefly about our plan to provide release time for teachers, and maybe Rob and Sandra, maybe I'll ask you up again here to kind of talk through, these are programmatic changes that we have, and just to kind of provide some insight into the release time, how that's going to be operationalized, and also the magnet school funding as well, and specialized services for other districts.
Good evening. So as we look at the school district, our secondary educators receive 5 preps, individual preps, and 5 admin periods a week. When we look at our elementary schools, we have our elementary teachers receive 4 individual preps and 1 administrative period a week. And we are finding that they need more time to do the work with our elementary students. And so part of this vision and plan is to increase our prep time for our elementary teachers to 5 individual preps and 2 administrative periods to complete the work and to really move the work of our school students.
And I think I need to highlight that even then, that is not enough. That's just scratching the surface. So I just want to emphasize that that's a starting point to start relieving the amount of work that educators at the elementary school level need to do. And given the amount of time that contractually they currently have, which is not sufficient. And I think I need to highlight that because we're not asking for the totality of what's needed, we're asking for a starting point to support.
Sure. So then we're also, if you look where there's a section for specialized learning, and we are really looking, as we looked at our out-of-district costs, we did an average of 10 out-of-district providers, and they have increased by 10% just this year in costs. And last year, as we were setting the budget, we set the budget to balance a little bit lower. And with those additional costs, we need the additional funds to support our programs and to support students in out of district. So this is really to balance our specialized learning costs. Yep.
So with that, I would like to conclude that I know it's a lot of information received. Some of you just got the books today. This is the first of many conversations we'll be having But I do also want to encourage you that there is additional information that's out there. Again, this year, as we did last year, we have a dedicated page on the school district's website that has FY25 budget items. All of our PowerPoints, all of our videos are included in there. We also held a budget workshop with the Board of Ed in December, and we had a business meeting. We had business meeting on December 19th and a workshop on the 12th of December that is also available on YouTube and have the links where we had a much deeper conversation on these issues and the drivers and so forth. So I know this has kind of been rushed, but I do encourage you to go to those two sources to get the website. And we have a lot of information on the budget page as well. We have a QR code for those that have smartphones. If you scan that QR code, it will take you directly to the budget page, and there's a wealth of information, and it's constantly getting uploaded onto our website. But we're here to answer any questions. We're happy to answer those questions. If you could figure out a process, maybe they go through finance committee or superintendent, and we'll get those questions to individuals. And we will be providing those updates as we make presentations to the Board of Education so that the majority can hear them. And with that, I would like to pass it back to Chairman Bernard.
So, Mayor, and then if you have a question, we'll follow protocol, just raise your hand and we'll, not the two chairs will acknowledge you and we'll get everybody's question.
I just have a question and an observation.
Sure.
When you're looking at proposed but not yet approved on the budget requests, those numbers haven't been approved by the governing body. They've been accepted and approved by the boards of education.
Yes, these are BOE requests. I think
Right.
that's how I headed the chart.
So the governing body hasn't authorized the 19% increase in debt.
No, those are just Board of Ed requests.
The other, and this is an observation, I noticed that this year, or the projection for '24, is the only year lower is '21. So we're at 11,480, which kind of dispels the myth or the rumor that people are saying that all these development projects are increasing and straining our school system. And it doesn't seem to be the case. I just want to point that out.
Yes, you're correct, Mayor.
A quick question. So I have a couple of questions with respect to the efficiency study that was conducted about 2-3 years ago, and then some questions regarding the key drivers. So with respect to the efficiency study, to what extent were some of the recommendations attributable to improving auditing mechanisms adopted? How effective are those mechanisms in identifying inefficiencies in budgetary allocations? And third, have you identified any inefficiencies? Approximately what's the dollar amount, and have you taken any corrective measures to prevent that from reoccurring between this budget cycle and the one from the previous one as well?
Absolutely. That's a great question, and thank you for asking that. So the first thing that and Sandra's getting up because she knows exactly where I'm going with this. The first area of efficiency that we kind of started with.
Okay, thank you so much. So, thank you, I should have just stayed here. But thank you so much, Linda, and then please chime in.
Absolutely.
So a lot of the efficiency study actually outlined just some targeted things that we could do. One of the things actually was to strengthen the partnership between the city side in terms of the way that we care for our grounds and for the facilities, and actually the way that we divvy up the work within that. And those actually, as soon as she had given this, not she, but it was a whole group, but the person that was working with my team was a woman. As soon as she had made those recommendations, we actually started to work with our recreation and parks partners and our partners on the city side to put in place plans that captured some of those efficiencies. So my department, because operations lives under my purview, my department actually put into play a lot of, actually most of the things within that efficiency study that had been recommended on the city side and the Board of Ed side. So I'll give you something pretty specific. Like, we actually took the drawings for all of the facilities for the campuses where schools are, and we looked at what Ken was doing with his guys around landscaping and grass cutting, and we actually redrew all the maps so that this notion of the Board of Ed was responsible for a certain portion of that in the perimeter of the building was inefficient, because if somebody's already out there cutting grass, they shouldn't stop around a certain perimeter. So we redrew what those practices were, and we actually said, well, what can't you do that it would be actually more efficient for my team to do, and what could you do? So a lot of those conversations took place, and there's actually a joint usage agreement that Robert Stowers was working on that reflects some of those efficiencies within that joint usage agreement. That's something that we actually hope to bring before the board really soon, that Robert had been working on. That's one way that we put those efficiency studies on. The other ones were recommendations for like how we should outsource some of our services, but then we did a comparative study. If we actually use some of the same contracts that the city was using, how can we actually capitalize and actually have that contract include us? So those were some of the ways that we were able to immediately put that into play. I know that Lunda and his team actually did some other work. Do you want to expand on that?
And I can talk about the communications.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
You could go.
So similar to the examples you just heard, many of the things that were also outlined within that efficiency study was how we can collaborate and work together. And therefore, for example, we had kind of started this, but we kind of enhanced the work that we do. City finance and Board of Ed finance working closer together. So we've been doing that. Last year, we were successful in upgrading our financial system. So I worked with my colleague Henry at the time in how to have a joint project team. So we worked together, so there are many efficiencies. So within that project, because what would happen in the past is we would work in silos, and then the city would say, we need these enhancements to the system, that project concludes, and then the Board of Ed does a similar project a year later, and you bring in new consultants. So those were some of the things that we did. Our purchasing department works very closely with Shannon. Purchasing on the city side, we have a number of projects we work on together, contracts, we piggyback on each other. Our HR works very closely with the city side of HR in recruitment and those types of things. And then I think Superintendent will speak on communications. But there's been a number of things from that efficiency study that we've implemented. There are a number of things that efficiency study that will actually add cost. They looked at staffing and they said in areas where we're inefficient that we haven't implemented just because the efficiency study said to do so. And so that's kind of the work that we've done. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
And I think like one of the things that was really articulated that we were running a really large system with a very small team, and IT was a place where, given the, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but given the number of hardware to IT techs in the district, we were, compared to other districts, actually operating with a smaller number of IT folks than what we needed. So that was one of the things that came out of the study, and one of the things that we were working to enhance, to better develop systems within the organization. In terms of, and you can speak more to that, and then I'll speak about communication.
Yeah, no, and I want to also talk about, one of the things we did is they wanted us to have a strategic plan, which we've actually put into play. And we've been implementing the first year of that strategic plan currently. We'll be sharing our updates at our mid-year review with the board. But we also talked a lot about collaboration. One of the things that this statement actually made about IT is that the two IT departments are very, very different, but there's a lot of things we can collaborate on. So one example will be when you get your capital request on your side, our phone systems are something that's going, so Joyce and I work closely. Our phone systems need to be upgraded. They're actually combined, but it's a joint capital request. So we're paying for a portion of it, you guys are paying for a portion of that capital, and if it gets approved, then we can actually do the upgrades on both police, fire, as well as our systems in our middle and high schools. So yeah, so we are trying to make sure that we actually do talk on everything that we do.
Perfect, thank you.
And I think lastly on communication, one of the recommendations was to make a staff reduction, which we did the year of the finalization of the efficiency study. We reorganized the communications team and made reductions. This year, we even made some further reductions where we combined the finance, the operations team to join forces with the deputy superintendent. So now Sandra Fayouez is our new deputy superintendent, but she's also in charge of operations as well.
Thank you.
We knew from the beginning when we embarked on an efficiency study, some of those recommendations were going to increase costs. It's efficiency in operations and function and how you complete the processes, so.
And one of the things I think I have to highlight is that the city team and the BOE team work really well together. We collaborate continuously and we have really productive relationships that allow us to build efficiencies within the organization. I don't think the public gets to see that, but I think it's something that's worthy of commenting on.
Perfect, thank you.
One, I did have a question related to the lunchroom.
Sandra, why don't you just take
And I 120% agree that, you know, a hot meal or any meal in the morning and lunch is vital to the success of the student. However, I've had an opportunity over the years to be invited to schools and actually sit and have lunch with students. And I was amazed, no, I was astonished by the amount of waste of the food. So while we have great numbers in terms of the number of meals served, do we have any data in terms of the waste, the amount that goes out of the schools in garbages, which is actually money that we're spending that is going into waste? I think we need to understand, is there any innovative approaches that we're taking? Is it the type of food? Is it, you know, the flavor? Is it something that these students are taking 1 or 2 bites and just literally throwing it away? I mean, I've sat at tables and said, are you throwing that away? And they're like, yeah, we don't like that. So how are we getting our hands around this? You know, we're seeing an increase of numbers, but we're not, doesn't seem like we're addressing the true root cause problem related to the meals and lunches.
Do you want to jump in or do you want me to start?
You can start.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. That's actually disappointing. I think that more recently we have switched vendors to Chartwell's, so if that's something that you're seeing more recently, I would love to speak to you about that. And invite you. There is a formula that all students have to take a certain amount of items in order for it to be counted as a meal. And that's how you get your reimbursement. So a student may just want just the tater tots, but they can't take just the tater tots in order for us to actually get reimbursed for the entire meal. And that's something that I agree with you in terms of that's wasteful, but that's actually something that by federal law that we actually have to have them take a full meal and their specific a prescribed number of items that they have to actually take with them.
But I do think it's important to highlight that Chartwell has engaged students in a number of initiatives to make sure that the type of meals that they are experiencing are ones that they're interested in. And I think that has been really successful. Even I think you should speak to some of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would invite you actually to come with me if you wanted to see what it's like. I don't know how recent your visits have been, but it may be recent and then I'd end up with.
Last month, actually.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to tell me what they had. So, and just Chartwell's does do a lot of student voice and choice surveys. I think that the high school students have more of an a la carte where they get more choices. The younger students tend to be the ones that we have a harder time finding the things that they want to eat. We have a lot of restrictions also that we don't serve some types of foods that students may be more used to eating because of the nutritional value and because of the restrictions in order for us to actually have those meals reimbursed. But we have been working more closely to do things like Global Eats, where we launch sort of campaigns. Like every month we launch a campaign that we take them to a different sort of cuisine, like last month was India. And we do things like if you don't want your meal, you can have a smoothie. And so we do try to offer them as many alternatives as possible.
So we are not measuring waste.
We're not measuring waste.
Thank you.
Do did you want to?
Yes, so one of the things related to the school lunch fund.
How would you even do that? How would you measure waste? Would you go around checking trash cans? I mean, how would you do that?
Yeah, exactly, it's done, that is done, at universities, it's done in corporations, where they measure the amount of tonnage that is thrown out, and there's a trade-off, there's an algorithm to measure how much waste you have versus how much food you're generating each day, and you make the necessary changes.
And the point system that you mentioned, they probably do that because they're trying to encourage the students to eat a complete meal.
If they are doing
Talks
it,
about-
we're not aware of that measurement.
I don't have that
Because
data.
we are not measuring that.
No, when you talked about maybe a child would just take tater tots. So they have that system to get reimbursed because they're encouraged, they want the children to get a complete meal,
Correct.
right? And that's a way to ascertain that, right?
A way to ascertain it also is by the surveying that we do, but in terms of your question as to do I know how much tonnage of food is being thrown out, I do not.
And if I may just, finish up on the food. We, this month actually, we engaged with a consultant that's doing this for us, not measuring waste, but they're looking at the operation of our food services, including, are we being billed correctly? What are we going after the maximum reimbursement rates? This is an individual that we came across through training, through finance training that was connected to us, and so I believe they're starting, we just signed that contract in a month or so, but we are looking at other efficiencies, and this may be something that we can also bring up with them and see if this could be part of that research that they're doing for us, but we are looking for ways to be efficient.
And I think to
I think Jim has a
points
question,
about-
sorry, Jim.
Yeah, calculating, I just wanna address the first point. Calculating the amount of waste, we might be able to do that, but it might not yield more efficiencies because of the federal regulations in terms of what constitutes a meal. So going back to Sandra's point about reimbursement, kids, we are required to service a certain amount of food to students. So unlike universities, the formula by which the federal government expects us to set up a meal is very different. And it might not allow us, even if we had that calculation, to build efficiencies because then we wouldn't be reimbursed. So it's something to keep in mind.
I'll circle back with the consultant, we'll bring it up.
Thank you.
My turn. Just to dig into the waste a little bit more.
Sure.
Do all of the schools do composting?
No, not all schools do composting.
Then I think what the next area of coordination probably should be with Public Works, set up a composting system. And that will also tell you how much waste you have. Because we know exactly how many tons of compost come from Wayton School, for example, I think we take their compost.
Yes,
One of the biggest contributors is Wayton School to compost. But
we have it at some of our campuses,
Yes.
but not at others, correct?
so I think it's a great program.
Thank you.
And not only does it work well in the school, it also sends a message for the kids that they know they're composting. They can then go home and tell their parents that they compost at school, and then we have a tremendous wave of composting going on throughout the city. And that's gonna help us in the long run. I mean, it doesn't seem like it'd be a big deal, but that's gonna reduce the amount of solid waste that we have thrown on the road. So all of these little things start to accumulate, and pretty soon we're talking about a little money.
I 100% agree with you, Jim, and I think that data will be, on the composting, will be really interesting. I also wanted to just provide an idea that I think your consultant, well, I worked for years in tourism, and most tourism companies, when they serve meals during the day, what isn't served is given to their employees or given to their employees at a subsidized price, and then they receive a tax rebate for that. And I know some restaurants also have partnerships with food that isn't used, and I don't know if it's legal in Connecticut, I don't know, I've seen it in New York City, so I know there's all kinds of regulations around it. But it's just a suggestion for, again, managing the waste, but also maybe tapping into some tax benefits that might be there if unused food is able to be reused.
We haven't been able to reuse it?
Yeah.
Yeah, try.
We have.
Yeah, I know, it's
regulation,
pretty stringent as to what we could do with the food that doesn't get eaten. But it's actually something that nationally people criticize. Even the American Dairy Association, because students have to take a milk in order for it to be considered a meal, but not many young kids drink milk. So, thank you. Understood. Point well taken.
I just want to say that I know like Person to Person in Norwalk is a great organization, and a lot of restaurants and grocery stores actually, things that are like past their 3 days that they can't really sell that are still good, they donate them there, and it could be a fun project to just gather the apples and oranges that kids aren't eating and donate them to Person to Person or have somebody take them there. I think it's a fun project to look into.
I know, I think the food has to be, I know you donate to the shelter, it's gotta be unpacked, it's gotta be packaged, you can't bring them food that's over.
I think Marvin School actually tried to do that, and you might wanna ask Jen. And the health department said no because of the individuality and because it goes through so many hands and the kids and everything. So they were trying to do like a tray of milk and a tray of apples to be able to share later, especially for children that don't have the food. But because of health regulations, they were shut down and they were told no.
But I think these are great ideas that we can further, like I know Boynton has been doing it for some time, and there are costs associated in trying to build the systems to engage in composting. But it's something that we can continue to build because we have it already in some schools. And we'll look into that as well. There's a lot of federal regulations that inhibit us from doing certain things too, so.
Quick question on the 2 million request for teacher prep time. In the decision to request the 2 million for teacher prep time, what considerations were made regarding the impact of students? As a result of considering the counterfactual. In other words, in the absence of this program, does that imply that teachers are unable currently to construct effective educational plan as a result students are hurt? Or is it something to just facilitate and strengthen their ability to
I'm gonna invite Mr. Pennington, okay?
Oh, yes.
Since it's under his purview. I mean, we could all answer it, but he's the expert.
Done, if you can answer.
So currently and historically, our elementary staff have had this set up as their structure. And so teachers have made it work. They are working in the morning, they're working after school, and they are planning a lot of different subjects in elementary. They're planning math and literacy and science and social studies. And so as we have been implementing systems and we're working with that admin period, because that's a teacher team period where the grade level teachers come together and they either collaboratively talk about lessons or they're really doing a deep dive into the work. There's to not have daily prep every single day. We just know, we've talked a lot about retention of our amazing staff. And this is something that will really provide them with the time. And as Dr. Estrella mentioned, we know that this isn't enough because when we look in our secondary level, we have five individual preps and 5 admin periods. So there's a disparity there, and we really want to make sure that we can continue to support our amazing educators, but also to build in the work that's happening to continue the work and for our students.
And in secondary, they only prep for one content.
And I just hate to point out the bleakness that nationally we have a teacher shortage, and a lot of that is reporting that teacher burnout. I'm a teacher, started as a teacher, will always be a teacher. We have members here on the Board of Ed that have been teachers. And so then it's not when we started teaching where you would have a lot of applicants for these teaching positions. It's like those numbers are dwindling. So this is also another means for us to actually make sure that we're retaining the staff that we have and that we're actually supporting them. And this was brought on by focus groups with teachers when we asked them what did they need, they actually had voiced that additional time and time to plan together was something that they thought was under-resourced.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, I have one more question. Given the fact that the enrollment is relatively flat over the last 5 years or so, yet we still, and we were just talking about this earlier, we still see this increase for prevalence, and that's gone up about 15%. That's a really difficult thing because you've got to look at the mix of the enrollment. Could you just comment a little bit on how you go about doing that? Or maybe.
I think we should just.
Say that.
So I think it's important to note, and Mr. Asmani highlighted earlier, that when we look at our specialized learning prevalence rate post-COVID nationally, we've seen an increase. I think back to 2019, I believe the national prevalence rate was around 11%. It's currently just over 15%. When we look at the state, they're over 17%, and we are in the mid 15%. So we are below the state, a little bit above the national average. And so we are seeing the needs. We've implemented a really strong SRBI system to allow us for scientifically research-based intervention, which are interventions for students to really have early targeted interventions, so students aren't going through school and then they get to high school and we realize, oh, there's something more that we need to support. We're able to do that earlier. I think when we're looking at our multilingual learners, we're currently at 22%, but over the last 4 years, that has increased. It's gone from 17 to 18. Last year, we were at 20, now we're at 22%. I mean, I was looking at the numbers just the other day. The December 1st count was 2,517. The January 1st count was 2,582. So the numbers are constantly, even though our overall enrollment has stayed the same, we are seeing that the number of students receiving specialized services has increased, and this is a national trend, and also the number of multilingual learners that we are servicing has also increased.
So several years ago, we put into the budget about $3 million plus to enhance educational resources, getting specific teachers that could address some of the issues that is more, that we're sending out of districts, for instance. So how do you forecast that? How do you know that you're going to have that many students that are going to be out of district? Are they more coming in at the lower levels that we have to follow through? And do you do a study to say, well, you know, rather than paying out of district tuition for this particular student who's in, let's say, the 7th grade, and we still, and maybe he has 12 more years to go in the system, that maybe it's better that we hire a teacher that's going to be able to handle that.
No, absolutely, and so we've done a lot of research tied to that $3 million that was set to build program in district. And what's interesting is that is still in development. So one of the programs was a co-teaching model, and every year you add a different grade level. And so we know that, like, going into next year, we will be adding 2 more kindergartens that are going to be implementing a co-teaching model. We've looked at our programs that we've offered. We've seen post-COVID that there is a need for us to develop even different type of programs. So we're in the process of developing that program to really support students in district, because that is really one of our priorities, because we know that developing programs, that $3 million we really looked at over time and how much money that prospectively, it's a prediction could have saved the district, because when you're looking at where we were back in 2015, 16, and then we started to develop these programs, if that rate continued, then currently we would have over 100 students more on a predictive level outplaced than we currently have. And so that would be significantly more money. So that was an amazing investment in specialized learning, and something that when we're looking at our programs we're still developing, we're still implementing, and that has helped us to support students in district versus outplacement.
So how many students are you to do out of district placement this year versus, and I think it was about, correct me if I'm wrong, was it about 111 or so?
Last year we were 105, we're at 110 this year.
Okay.
So just to give a number on that. And like I said, this is something that as we continue to develop new programs, that will also help us to support students in district versus having them go out of district. But we have those programs that were started back when the $3 million investment happened. And as we have gone, when we look at, we talked earlier about the new legislation around supporting students till their end of their 22nd year in school. And our transition program just last year, we said we need more programs to support our 18 to 22 population, because if we don't have that, they would be going out of district and we would be spending more money. And we currently have our Next Steps program that's at the Family Center. We also have our Project Search program. One is at the community college, but last year we opened a program at the hospital. And so that program has really helped us to support students in district versus having to send them out of district. But building that program, there is a cost to that as well. But the savings outweigh
That's a good point, because I think as a selling point for this, I think you should try to emphasize the savings side of it too. Because clearly, when we went through this last year, we were talking about the egregious cost it is to send somebody out of district. And, it could be one kid for $150,000 or more. So I think it's important that when you give us these numbers, when you present these numbers, that you articulate the fact that we are saving money in the long run. We're spending more now, but we're saving. And that's why when I first saw that $3 million several years ago, I was all in favor for it. I thought it was a great idea.
Well, they have done that, but to your question, sometimes we don't have the wherewithal to determine if someone's gonna stay in district as well, and you guys jump in if I'm wrong. The way I understand it, there are some cases where we might not have capacity to treat that student, and so they do have to go out of district. And sometimes it could be where the family, we might get notified that this particular student has a particular IEP and he or she has to go to. So we really don't have a whole lot.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
A lot to play with that. And also you've asked about predicting. We don't always know the numbers and the magnitude of cases that you're gonna get this school year. Right now, we're in the middle of 23, 24. Tomorrow, they can get calls, we're gonna get 500 kids.
I agree, 100%.
So I just wasn't sure you knew that.
I agree, 100%, that's why I asked the question.
We've experienced that. I think that the most important thing I think you articulated is that as we create these programs, we're reducing costs over time. And I know that Mr. Pennington in one of the presentations earlier this year showed how given the programs that we currently have, we kind of did a predictor of how much money it would have cost us if these children were outplaced versus the students being served in-house. And we were in that predictor, we were saving more than $50 million with the
Since the $3 million was implemented. So that's looking.
Because we're serving those students in-house versus
There are some and you can predict medical fragile students that, even with all the ADA compliance involved, they are best served in more of their hospital.
No, I'm not
Those
saying,
costs are right.
I'm not saying that you're not gonna grade somebody on whether they predicted right or wrong, but there should be some methodology that we evaluate them and get look at hiring in-house as opposed to just automatically doing out-of-district, that's all.
And our focus has been that, to keep kids in-house or in district as much as we possibly can.
Absolutely, our focus is really to best serve all of our students. And so as we can develop programs that will meet the diverse needs of our students, I think that the better off we will be. And that will allow us to support them in district, but I do hear there are times where a child does need to have a different setting as well. So I wanna make sure that I highlight that key point.
Let me piggyback, if you would, on the notion of in school, in district as opposed to out of district. For my own information, what impact does homeschooling have on budgetary spending, budgetary savings? What's the magnitude of it? Because I personally don't have any idea.
There isn't one, because it is a parent's choice to educate their child at home, and therefore it is then on the parent. I mean, we check in with them yearly to see the work that they have done, but a financial impact, there is not one.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I had a question related to the budget drivers, and it's centered around the topic of impact. For example, if we look at the magnet school funding and the current request is $2 million, I guess my question is, what is the impact if that was only $1 million? Does that mean that this program could not go forward, or it would go forward at a different rate, a different capacity? So what is the impact of some of these drivers?
I think first and foremost, it is important to note that we already have many of these magnet programs functioning and operating in the district, and not receiving the funding will mean the reduction or elimination of programs that are already in place. For instance, we've instituted the International Baccalaureate program across the district. One of the things that we really did strategically was have this program expand from kindergarten to 12th grade. And that program comes at a cost. It comes at a cost because there's professional development, there's fees that we have to pay to have the status, to support the schools in acquiring the status that is critical in order for us to sustain and maintain. And I was just at Brian McMahon a few days ago before we went on holiday, where we were celebrating the students that had graduated with the International Baccalaureate certificate. So it really allows our students to go into college very well prepared for the challenges of college academia. The other component is it gives us the opportunity to have programs like at Wolfbit, where they have an integrated arts program. It gives us the opportunity to have the programs like we have at CMS, where we have the Bank Street model, we have the Montessori model. So we have an array of different programs, marine science, health professions that are already in play and are in continuous growth and development that we would not be able to sustain unless we would have this funding.
So again, and let me preface by saying the city does not control how the funding is allocated. But if we were to look specifically at the magnet school funding, are you saying the $2 million that is listed here, if you don't receive that $2 million, this program comes to an end?
It could potentially face reductions. I think
Well, there's a difference. Phase reductions, that's a change in impact versus going away. So I'm trying to understand, are these numbers go, no-go numbers? Meaning if you don't get $2 million or allocate, because you'd be doing the allocation, if $2 million is not allocated for the magnet school funding, that program goes away, or will it be reduced? There'll be a lesser impact to the district.
It runs the risk of being eliminated, yes. And I think
it's like playing Tetris, right? They have to look at NPS as a whole and all the programs, not just the magnet. So you're saying If you don't get the 2 million, the magnet will go away. But in reality, if they don't get the 2 million, then they have to scramble and start thinking bigger picture again and playing Tetris. And what can they remove, what can they shift, what can they do to be able to keep that magnet program? But also, I think people also forget removing a program means removing people. And right now, we're short-staffed on top of that, so removing people is not an option. So it's basically sitting down, trying to figure out how to save those jobs and how to save that program. The clear goals.
Again, the city doesn't allocate, we don't say, okay, here's $2 million for magnet school, here's $2 million
Right,
for
but you can't ask us.
Right, that's not our role, and that's not
Right,
our
but you
area.
can't ask us if you don't give us the 2 million for magnet.
I'm trying to get a understanding of the level of impact.
It can go away.
Okay, so that, as we look at all of the budget drivers, I'm just trying to get an understanding of the level of impact if the full amount is not allocated. What is the level of impact on some of these key drivers? And I just pointed out one as an example, the magnet school. And what you're saying is that if 2 million is not allocated for the magnet school, that program will go away.
Correct.
I just want to kind of get a level of understanding of the impact of the funding for these budget drivers.
If we could just add to that, if we didn't give you not we give you, but the $2 million was not allocated, but $1.9 million was allocated, what would happen?
We would have to look at ways either to reduce in other areas or to reduce within that program.
So the program would be modified to some extent.
We would have to.
As a quick follow-up, have PPPs been never pursued to try to compensate potential loss of funding?
What do you mean by, what are?
Public-private partnerships with companies?
We are constantly engaging in public partnerships. We have a number of philanthropic partners that support us budgetarily, particularly if you look at our data and analytics team. It's currently being funded with private dollars.
Now, from the council side, is there anything that I can do to help increase the possibility, the likelihood of actually getting or kind of securing some of these PPPs? Or do you feel that CPS is doing?
I think we've been doing a really great job of building relationships with private-public partners and finding the best ways of capitalizing on resources. But if you have any partners that we can show you our list, and if you know other partners that you think are people that we should engage with, we're always open and willing to further engage. I think there was a question before asked around grants. I think the city spoke to that. And I think it's important for us to mention that we're always seeking grant opportunities, and we've been pretty successful. Just like recently, we got $15 million. The challenge with grants is that they're very specific in terms of the way that they can be utilized, and a lot of the grants, with the exception of ESSER dollars, they cannot supplant, right? So they allow us to enhance, but not necessarily supplant things that we need to operationalize day-to-day things that we need within the organization.
Usually the instance as opposed to.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And between grant and private funding, it's actually 13% of our total budget. So it's actually a really huge number. It's actually depicted in one of the slides.
Perfect, thank you.
The problem is we rely on them and they go.
Correct.
That's the thing, so like sustainability is an issue.
Yeah, if I could just want to mention one more thing about the philanthropic piece. And I didn't even use my name, I'm Ralph Algisi. But we do work in conjunction with the city. I mean, in about 2 weeks, we'll be meeting with a lot of our philanthropic partners. Lamont will be there with us. I know, Mayor, you were also back, just to remember on the invite list if you actually are able to come. I know Lamont is definitely going to be there so that we can actually work together collaboratively with a lot of our partners and stuff and continue to grow. We have some new partners that are joining us too at that meeting.
Perfect, thank you. Okay,
Okay, just we're approaching the top of the hour, if there's no other questions, you really want, oh, yes,
Just a real quick
yes.
one. So the teacher release time, how is that being accomplished? Are we increasing certified staff to cover? Are we increasing paraprofessionals or? I guess my question relates to, are we increasing our contractual wage responsibilities in the overall coming years?
So we are looking at our elementary schools, and it would increase our certified teacher to bring in other specialists to support the school. So it would be, in elementary school, they have gym, they have PE, they have library media specialty, they have art and music, and this would then bring in another opportunity for a school. And so it brings in another elective to support students, which would then release the teacher, so that instruction, it's really important that we're not losing instruction to accomplish this. And so it would then bring in another special to each of our buildings.
And so does that require fitting out new spaces? You know, I know a lot of the schools are very tight, so it would require another classroom, I guess, or.
I think that would be on a school-to-school basis in terms of what the decisions are around what is the best way to increase that prep time for the school, and it might look differently because of the fact, particularly because schools have different themes or areas of focus that might, that will definitely have an impact on how those decisions are made and then how space allocations will take place from that point forward.
So there might be some costs associated.
Yeah, and remember also, it's not just on electives, it could be for science,
For social
you can have a science cluster, social studies cluster. So there's different ways in which we can program to meet that need that will be up to the school leadership to determine in terms
So
of
there's
what's
staffing and programming.
Correct.
But we're not expecting any financial impact to facilities. We would try to be as efficient as possible. The financial impact is to the certified staff, I would believe more so. Because if it's a science, they could just go into that classroom and then the teacher could go prep with another teacher in a meeting room or something like that. It doesn't require like an additional space per se.
And it could be that a special is pushing into a classroom as
Yeah.
well, so.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's,
Okay.
if you want more music, you might need another music room. I was just thinking you might need to.
Well, they may not be able to if there isn't a music room. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we'd like to thank everyone, thank the Board of Education for the presentation and the dialogue, and we'll adjourn at this time. Thank you.